Hi, my name is Vijay Bandaru. Welcome to the Learnovative Agile and Scrum video series. I'm a certified Scrum trainer, certified team coach, and certified enterprise coach from Scrum Alliance. We prepare these videos to help you understand the concepts of Scrum, effectively use them in your projects. In today's video, we're going to discuss about product backlog refinement. What's the process of the backlog refinement? What are some best practices, tips, some anti-patterns? When is the best time to have the backlog refinement? These are the things we're going to discuss. Imagine you are working on a product. It's a complex problem you're going to solve. So Scrum is meant for solving the complex problems. Complex problem means unknown is more than known. So let's say the product owner has created a product backlog initially with some items. Obviously, all these items will not have same level of details and cannot be prioritized, cannot be identified with the dependencies, and all the items may not have the similar size. And in Scrum, the way we work is like this. Every circle represents a sprint. So each circle in this spiral represents one sprint. So imagine if you have started your product with, say, let's say 30 items initially. You won't upfront plan them 7 here, 7 here, 7 here, remaining here, because it will become a plan-driven approach and it is less flexible and more of a defined process kind of thing. So how do we work? Every sprint we go to the planning on the first day. Some of the topmost items will be selected into the sprint backlog. By the end, you create an increment. By the time you go to the next sprint planning, some of these items will come up and waiting here. Again, you will take some items and create an increment. So usually we call this as iterative and incremental approach. So before starting the first sprint, the developers, product owner, and Scrum Master should have an idea on the first top few items. So they do an initial product backlog refinement. So maybe they spend a couple of days to discuss the topmost items. Let's say they are discussing the top 3 items. They discuss the acceptance criteria. Product owner will clarify the doubts related to the developers and they identify the dependencies. If the item is too big, they will try to break it into smaller items. And high level architecture changes, all these things they discuss, and the developers will provide estimate. Based on all this information, the product owner will decide this is 1, 2, 3, decide the order. So they have some items ready for starting the sprint 1. So let's say they start the sprint 1, they go to the planning. Because these 3 items are clear to the developers, which were discussed in the backlog refinement, they will decide some items to be pulled into sprint 1. So usually the product owner will decide the order of the product backlog items, and how many items can be selected into the sprint backlog will be the decision of developers. So in this case, let's say top 2 items the developers have selected. So 1 and 2 will become part of the sprint 1. While they are working on sprint 1 items, they take a small amount of time to do the product backlog refinement for the upcoming items. Here upcoming items are all these items, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, all these items. So by the time they come to the backlog refinement, if any change happened to the number 3 item, which was already estimated here, the developers will get a chance to look into the changes and re-estimate. If there is no change, then again they focus on the next set of items, maybe another 3, 4. They look into the item. If the item is too big, they logically split into smaller, break it into smaller items. They discuss the acceptance criteria and they discuss the UI and the dependencies. The developers also look into the high level architectural changes, design changes to be done, and then they provide estimates. For example, when product owner walks into the backlog refinement, these 2 items have got the same business value. And the developers, based on the understanding, they have selected 8 story point estimation for this and 5 story point estimation for this, based on the complexity, uncertainty, and volume of work required. Now the situation here is these 2 items have same business value but different estimate. So high value, low cost item will be prioritized. So that means this information will help the product owner to reprioritize, reorder the product backlog items. So that means one of the activities inside the product backlog refinement is based on the information, reordering is also possible. So once sprint 1 is completed, they go to the sprint 2 planning on the first day of sprint 2. Because in the previous sprint backlog refinement, they have discussed all these items, the developers can select some of those items into sprint 2. For example, this time they have selected 3 items, 3, 4, 5. So 3, 4, 5 will become part of the sprint 2 backlog. Again, while doing the sprint 2, they take a small amount of time to do the backlog refinement for the future items. So similarly, sprint 3 PBR, sprint 4 PBR, like that. So that means, in a simple terms, the PBR can be considered as continuous just enough planning. What does it mean? Continuous means ongoing. Just enough means to get the items ready for the next sprint. For example, when they're doing the initial product backlog refinement before starting the sprint 1, their goal is to keep some items ready for starting the sprint 1. Inside the sprint 1, when they do the backlog refinement, the goal is to keep some items ready for sprint 2. Sprint 2 backlog refinement is to keep items ready for sprint 3. Similarly, sprint 3 backlog refinement is to keep items ready for sprint 3. So it's a continuous. Just enough means just to keep items ready for the upcoming 1 or 2 sprints. You're not doing big upfront planning for all these items, defining clearly, estimating and order, because it will be a waste of time and waste of effort. So usually focus is on getting the items ready for the next 1 or 2 sprints. So that means the backlog refinement and the sprinting will help you to achieve 2 things here. The one is discovery and the other is delivery. So discovery is happening through product backlog refinement. Every sprint when you do the backlog refinement, you will discover the details about the futuristic items. And the delivery will happening through increment. So every sprint you are creating an increment, which is a working software, so which will create value to the customers. So discovery and delivery are going hand in hand. Now, what are the roles of the product owner, developers and scrum master inside the backlog refinement? So first, the product owner will explain the backlog items according to their current order. The product owner will explain the items to the developers. Then clarified, product owner and the developers together discuss the clarifications and doubts, assumptions or anything related to those items, discuss internally. And then understood, the developers will understand the items of the product backlog in terms of their functionality, acceptance criteria, high-level UI things, any dependencies, all these things. And then estimated, the developers will provide the estimations to those items, whatever according to the estimation technique, whatever estimation technique they have selected, the developers will provide the estimation. And then finally, ordered. The product owner will use this information, value, cost, risk, any other parameters, dependencies like that, order those items. So these are the things, and the Scrum Master will help the product owner and developers in terms of facilitating the backlog refinement and ensuring that the product developers are looking into the acceptance criteria, they're understanding them, all the clarifications are cleared by product owner. They're not directly jumping to estimations. Instead of that, they look into the details first and then understand and split them into smaller items, smaller achievable items. Those kind of facilitation Scrum Master will provide. Now, when to have the backlog refinement? Our understanding was the backlog refinement can be done after the sprint planning, before the sprint review, anytime. So let's consider a 2-week sprint here. Usually 2-week sprint means 10 working days will be there. So for a 2-week sprint, 4 hours will be the time box according to the Scrum. Roughly 8 hours for maximum 8 hours for 1 month sprint, shorter for shorter sprints, because we are taking about a 2-week sprint, so roughly 4 hours. So first half day is gone for sprint planning. Every day daily Scrum 15 minutes. whatever time that is convenient. The developers will have daily scrum every day, 15 minutes. The review and retrospective will happen last working day, post lunch session. So review can be 2 hours because according to Scrum, the sprint review time box is maximum 4 hours for 1 month sprint, shorter for shorter sprint. So in this case, we are talking about 2-week sprint, so roughly 2 hours. And retrospective 1.5 hours. Again, according to Scrum, the time box for retrospective is maximum 3 hours for 1 month sprint, shorter for shorter sprints. So because we are considering 2-week sprint, so first half day sprint planning, last half day roughly review retrospective gone for it. So then they go to the next sprint. So as we discussed, the backlog refinement can happen anytime after the planning, before the review, anytime during these days. So let's explore a couple of options. If the plan to do the backlog refinement in day 2, which is not really so effective because too early. Similarly, if they plan on day 9 or day 10 to do the backlog refinement, it's not very effective because it is too late. So leaving first few days, last few days, maybe here or here or here, they can do the backlog refinement. So what is the recommendation from Scrum? So according to Scrum, when, how long, how many times of the PBR can be decided by the Scrum team. That means each sprint, it can vary. It is not a standard either 5th day or 6th day or 7th day. There is no such thing. So the Scrum team can decide when, how long, how many times for the PBR. Now let's see some common questions related to the product backlog refinement. Who is responsible for product backlog refinement? The product owner is responsible for backlog refinement. Who participates in product backlog refinement? Usually Scrum team participates, including all the developers, product owner and Scrum Master. They participate in the product backlog refinement. What is the difference between grooming and product backlog refinement? This refinement was initially called as grooming. But in, I think, 2012 or 13 version of the Scrum Guide, it was changed to refinement because the word grooming is not used in a good manner. It's considered as an abusing word in some countries. So Jeff Sutherland and Ken Schwaber, who are the co-creators of Scrum Guide, they have changed it to refinement. Is it okay if only few developers participate in product backlog refinement? My recommendation will be no. The reasons: if you have, let's imagine 8-member developers, a plus product owner developers, so total 10 roughly. So if you allow only 2 to 3 people to attend the backlog refinement, obviously the remaining people will not have transparency. There is no clarity. And if these 2 people are absent in the next sprint, the remaining people don't know what was discussed in the backlog refinement. So knowledge gap and transparency issue. Second reason, these 2 people cannot ask the questions on behalf of all the other people. Third and most important, 2 to 3 people cannot decide the estimate without consulting the other people because their commitment levels will be less, those who are not participating in the backlog refinement for estimation. So for these reasons, I would strongly recommend all the developers are required for backlog refinement. But in some exceptional cases, it's okay to have at least 50 to 60% people. What is the recommended duration for the backlog refinement? So until 2017 Scrum Guide, there was a recommendation about 10% of the overall capacity can be reserved for backlog refinement. But from 2020 Scrum Guide, it was removed. So the best people to decide is Scrum team. So according to their capacity, their availability, and the sprint length, how much work they are doing. So my recommendation, it's not a Scrum recommendation. As an experienced Scrum coach and Scrum Master, my recommendation will be, depending upon your velocity, you can decide the backlog refinement duration. For example, if your sprint average velocity or team's velocity is X story points, then at least 1.5 to 2x story points worth of items always available in the product backlog, which are explained, clarified, understood, estimated, and ordered. So keeping that rough 1.5x to 2x story points worth of items, how much duration it is required, you decide. Why product backlog refinement is an activity, not an event? So if we go back here, sprint planning will be the first event in the sprint, first day. There is a specific time box for that and you cannot skip it. Similarly, daily scrum, every day, same time, same place, there is a specific time box for that and you cannot skip. Similarly, review and retrospective, they are scheduled on the last working day, one after the other, back to back, and they cannot be skipped and they have a specific time box. That means these are chronologically ordered, they have a specific time box and they are mandatory. That is why they are called as events. But the product backlog refinement, as we just discussed a few minutes back, when, how many times, how long can be decided, which means in one sprint, you may have the backlog refinement maybe on day 5, for example, 2 hours, maybe 3 p.m. to 5 p.m. In day 7, you may have 1 hour, maybe 11 a.m. to 12 p.m. Third sprint, maybe day 5, 1 hour, and day 8, 1 hour based on the need. Fourth sprint, you can ignore the backlog refinement, provided you have enough items already explained, clarified, understood, estimated, and ordered in the product backlog. So that is why even though the backlog refinement is happening inside the sprint, it is not considered to be an event, it is an activity. Then can the product backlog refinement be done more than once? Yes, of course, it is possible. In fact, my recommendation would be keep the product backlog refinement for one mandatory, one optional. When I say one mandatory, at least it will help you to keep some items ready for all the upcoming 1 or 2 sprints so that the team can see a pipeline for the next 1 or 2 sprints. They have more visibility, more transparency. And the optional one, in case while the developers cannot estimate in the first product backlog refinement due to some clarifications pending, let product owner take maybe 2-3 days time to discuss those clarifications with the stakeholders, users, customers, and then get back. Maybe a short 30 minutes, 45 minutes backlog refinement just to go through the clarifications for the pending items which were not estimated, then estimate. So one mandatory, one optional is a good idea from my experience. And can the product backlog refinement, the next question, can the product backlog refinement be skipped in a sprint? Yes, if you have enough items already lined up, because if you blindly doing the product backlog refinement and keeping too many items available in the product backlog, then it will lead to unnecessary waste of time and waste of effort. So if you have enough items ready for the next 1 or 2 sprints and they are not going to change according to the product owner, then you can skip occasionally the product backlog refinement. What are some anti-patterns for product backlog refinement? The first one is rare refinement. When I say rare refinement, very occasionally doing the backlog refinement, it will lead to non-availability of the items ready to pull into the sprint. So it will make the sprint planning overburden. So make sure the backlog refinement is happening with a frequency. Second, too much refinement. It will lead to too many items available in the product backlog. What if they change the order, change the details? It's a waste of effort and time. So it should not be too occasional or too frequent. So you decide according to what is fit for you. The third anti-pattern is unprepared refinement, which means the product owner is not coming prepared, well prepared for the backlog refinement. The items are not given enough details, acceptance criteria is not defined. So if you are a Scrum Master, coach the product owner to come prepared, at least with the high level acceptance criteria is created. If a rough UI is available, it is good, and any high level dependencies like that. The fourth one is less developers involvement. Not involving all the developers will lead to the discussion points we discussed a few minutes back. Lack of transparency, lack of commitment, and the dependency like that. Fifth one, only seniors estimate. So this is anti-pattern because it will lead to less commitment with the other people. So the estimations for the backlog items in the backlog refinement should be done on a consensus based. All the developers should provide their feedback. The sixth anti-pattern is surface level understanding. That means only a very high level understanding of the items and then give a ballpark estimates, which will make the sustainable pace impacted negatively. Because when you estimate the items with a very, very surface level understanding, when that item is pulled into the sprint backlog, obviously the developers may find some surprises, which may impact that estimate. So that is why if you are a Scrum Master, ensure that the developers are digging deep to understand the clearly acceptance criteria and the dependencies, functional dependencies, technical dependencies, uncertainties, all these things, and then go for the estimate. Seventh anti-pattern is not splitting the large items. One of the important factors in the product backlog refinement is breaking down the large items into smaller so that they can fit into a sprint and come out as a working software. So decide what kind of large items you are seeing in the backlog refinement and then logically split them using some splitting techniques. There are several splitting techniques available. You can use one of them. And then inconsistent practices. That means every product backlog refinement introducing new practices, which will keep them into confusion state. So define some practices, time to time inspect and adapt. Next, ignoring the developer's input. So sometimes product owner will ignore the developer's inputs because they are also equally involved in the product development. So they may give some important suggestions related to technical debt or technical dependencies or something. So if you are a product owner, please respect the suggestions, advices given by the developers and make them part of the thought process. And the last one, lack of inspect and adapt. That means blindly following only one approach for the backlog refinement. Scrum is all about inspect and adapt. So the more you inspect and adapt about the process, when to do, how long you are doing, whether the effectiveness of the backlog refinement, involvement of the developers, and the tools you are using, time to time inspect and improve the backlog refinement accordingly. And from my experience, some best practices I can quote here to make your product backlog refinement effective. The first one, reserve some capacity for the refinement. Every sprint, as I said, one mandatory, one optional. Keep a small, maybe 2 to 3 hours to start with, and then you inspect and adapt. So that brings a focus. Keep one mandatory, one optional, as we discussed earlier. And then product owners should do some homework before coming to the product backlog refinement, like clearly defined acceptance criteria, any functional dependencies identified, a rough UI is available, like that. A high level readiness criteria is defined. Some teams use definition of ready. We have published an article in our website, www.learnovative.com, under resources section, blog section. You can go through that. So definition of ready is not part of Scrum framework, but effectively created definition of done, which is not stringent enough. For example, something like at least major acceptance criteria should be clearly defined. A rough UI mockup is available. High level dependencies are identified. Something like that. If you have, that's a good criteria. And next tip is keep the duration based on the velocity. As I said earlier, if your team's velocity is X story points, then maybe 1.5 to 2X story points worth of items should be always available in the product backlog. Accordingly, define the duration. And define the format and improve over time. So how you are doing the product backlog refinement, create a format and time to time inspect and adapt to improve the format. Everyone's contribution should be ensured. If you are a Scrum Master, please make sure all the developers are participating, all the developers are asking the questions, clarifications, the estimations are given based on the consensus based. These things should be taken care of. Split large stories into smaller. Focus on identifying large items in the backlog items and logically split them using some splitting techniques. Time management. So the backlog refinement should be done using time box. So first define a time, schedule a meeting, and accordingly you can conduct the backlog refinement. So time management is also equally important to make sure the product backlog refinement is effective. And the last but not least, inspect and adapt to improve the product backlog refinement. So Scrum is all about the success with mantra with Scrum is inspect and adapt. What you are doing today may be good, but over a period of time, if you change it, it will become great. So improve the processes, practices, the tools, the way communication, collaboration, the splitting happening in the backlog refinement, time to time inspect and adapt to make it better. That's all about the product backlog refinement. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you have liked it, please share, like, and subscribe to our channel. We are coming up with a lot of valuable videos, important videos related to Agile and Scrum. And by the way, if you are looking for any public or private workshops related to Agile, Scrum, and Safe, please contact us using this contact information. We'll be very happy to help you. Thank you so very much and have a nice time.